Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. I am so excited to be with you guys every single week because we're learning so much each and every time we, talk and hear each other's voices. And many of us have adopted a carb restricted diet because of the many benefits that we've learned about. We've learned that carb restriction helps us to control our hunger, our weight. It reduces those fat molecules floating around in our blood called triglycerides as well. And it even helps to increase our healthy cholesterol called HDL. And believe it or not, contrary to popular opinion, even the bad cholesterol, the LDL, in most of us will improve on a carb restricted diet. And you already know that the other benefits include reductions in insulin resistance and ultimately improving our metabolic health. Many of us who are sensitive to excessive carbs have experienced improvements of, all kinds of symptoms just fading away. And for me, it was an irritable bowel problem that simply went away on a low carb diet. Now imagine being so sensitive to carbs that you can't even consume probably the number one source of glucose in our diet, which is fructose. Imagine being that sensitive to fructose. It's an amazing thing to imagine. Well, today's guest is going to share her story and how fructose has become her number one enemy. Today's guest is Terri A. And like me, she was born and raised in the wonderful city of Chicago. She and also like my two boys, Brandon and Justin, she attended Catholic elementary school. And although my boys didn't attend Catholic high school, she did attend a all-girls Catholic high school as well. Ironically, I actually attended a Catholic university, and that's Xavier in Louisiana, which is the only historically Black school that's Catholic, just a little FYI. She later received 2 bachelor's degrees at George Williams College in both physical education and psychology. And she is a sports enthusiast, having played 3 intercollegiate sports and claims to be a good dancer. But unfortunately, we won't get a chance for her to prove that during this podcast. So with that, Terri A., I welcome you to the Protecting Your Nest podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I really appreciate you.
Well, I am so appreciative of you. And, we literally have just started our relationship, our patient doctor relationship recently. And I'm excited about that because I want to do my best to help you along your way. So I'm actually going to use this episode not only to share what you've done to improve your health and your interesting story, but also to get to know you better myself. So as a clinician, I'm doing a little research with our interaction because the questions I have for you, I don't have the answers to yet until we talk. So I just want to put that out there. Full disclaimer, guys. But before we begin, I also want to publicly thank 8A Fox, who is also known as the Black Carnivore, for having a platform not only to support people like my guest today, and that's Terri A., but also to teach other people who are interested in carnivore what to do, how to do it, but most importantly, to be a source of support. So, but for anybody listening to my podcast or watching this on YouTube, pause this video, pause the podcast, go to YouTube, look for the Black Carnivore, and subscribe to her channel because she is the true expert on everything carnivore. So I just wanted to throw that out. So let's get started, Terri.
Okay.
You attended George Williams College in Williams Bay, Wisconsin.
Yeah, well, actually, it was in Downers Grove.
In Downers Grove.
Yeah,
so there's a different one.
Well, the main campus was in Downers Grove. I attended William Bay. They had a special class called September Camp for rec majors and PE majors. So
good.
The main classes was at Downers Grove then.
Oh, okay, cool. So it was closer to home and easier to get to. So talk a little bit about that experience of being, what was your college experience like?
I loved it. I loved college. I loved being a gym rat. I love being, academic, and I remember picking, taking a full load because in my mind, taking 15 credits or 19 credits was the same amount of money. I'm
Mm.
like, well, shoot, I'm going to take 19 credits. So, I just loved it. It was hard when I had to leave.
Hmm.
So when at Williams Bay, we did learn boating, sailing, rowing, canoeing,
Mm.
outdoor stuff. So that was
That's
the
cool.
purpose, and that was like a 2-week course that we had to do.
And when I thought you were at the one in Wisconsin, I noticed that was what they literally had a college right on the
Right,
water,
it's still
right?
there.
And
Yeah, actually, the campus now is at Williams Bay. The Georgia
got
Williams
you.
campus is under Aurora
Yeah,
University at Williams Bay.
got
Right.
you. I saw that. So
Yes.
that's very helpful, and I was very inspired by the water and just
Oh,
the when I went to the website, I said, "This sounds like a fun place to
yes.
train." So thanks for sharing a little bit about yourself with that. Um, you know, let's talk a little bit about this fructose. Sometimes some people call it fructose, whatever, tomato, tomato, right?
Right.
And most people know that high fructose corn syrup is a problem. They also know that it's in every
Yes.
thing on the shelf, right?
Right. Right on.
So just for foundational, what could you just tell us what is fructose intolerance?
Well, it's you have sugars and things, and fructose is mainly in plants, highly, but it's also most vegetables. You have sucrose in terms of table sugar, lactose in terms of milk sugar, maltose, and so forth. But fructose, which I was not aware of that much, is what's mainly in plants.
Mhm.
And fructose intolerance is when you can't metabolize, break down, or effectively digest fructose. So, um, you know, it became a problem. Well, I didn't know it was a problem until I was 48.
Right.
I mean, so, but
That's insane. But think about how insane that is.
yeah,
And for those listening, yes, there's fructose in plants. That means vegetables. There's definitely fructose in fruit.
yeah,
So, man, what are you gonna eat, right? I mean,
right,
that's insane. So, with that, I think it's important we go back a little bit when you were a little cute girl, right?
right.
And, doing your thing, trying to just live the American dream, right? And then all of a sudden, I'm assuming that you had some things that happened to you back then that were not normal as it relates to food. So what types of things did you discover in those younger
Well,
years that
it was weird. In like third grade, um, before that, I had migraine headaches. I don't know how often they were, but I do remember going to the hospital like before third grade. I was really young for migraine headaches, but the migraine headaches stopped in third grade. That's when I remember the jittery episodes happening, getting
mm,
hungry, unusually hungry, like 3 hours. And so I just adapted and learned that if I ate, I would feel okay. And I did that until I was 48. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't really talk about it to anybody, just except when I got really sick, that I was hungry, I was feeling funny. And, they would, give me something to eat, but I didn't know what was going on. I never really thought about it all the way through college, through my, adulthood. And so I didn't really find out until 2009.
that's crazy because when things are not normal and we see our clinicians, I'm just as guilty as of this as I've gotten better because I think outside the box now and I'm always trying to find the root cause, right?
Right,
But
right.
man, we're like, "You're okay," and sometimes we're saying that because you're young and we assume most young people are okay, you'll be fine. Just eat more often, right? But man, if it's not normal, it's not normal, right? And it's just weird how we live in a world where it's like people just kind of blow things off. And sometimes it's because of the 15-minute, 20-minute office visit, right? So,
I've never been in a hospital as a young child, except
nothing.
for doing exams,
Mhm.
physical exams. And I don't ever remember talking to a doctor. I remember the x-ray for the migraines, but I never remember, to me, it was never at the forefront of my mind,
Right. Okay,
so
so let's now fast forward to you're older now
yeah.
and you start experiencing, or you're paying, I remember I literally was listening to something on my way here, and I think it was Joe Rogan, and he was saying that,
Okay.
they were talking about NyQuil and how it was so strong back in the day.
Mm,
And then he said, "Man, it's not as strong as it used to be." But he said, "When you're an adult, you notice how strong it is. When you're a kid, you don't pay attention, right? So maybe
right.
when you're a kid, you didn't notice, but when you became an adult, you notice everything." So what symptoms as an adult started to bother you as it relates to this
Well,
intolerance
after
situation?
I had my pregnancies is when I first noticed that the hypoglycemia, still, I didn't name it that, but I remember having that effect, but more severely. And so after both pregnancies, those the symptoms got worse. And
Okay.
then I had a fall that now should not have been as bad as it was. It was almost fatal.
Mm,
So this is in 94, 93, and 97, I had the fall. And so they didn't know what was wrong. My lungs were filled with blood. The
mm.
doctor reached over to me and said he's never done, he had to do um, a
Oh,
hemothyroid.
like, yeah, thoracentesis or something
Yeah,
where you
he had
put
to
a needle in there. Yeah.
and he said he couldn't stop the bleeding. And he reached over and said, I've never had to do this twice. So he had to go in twice. And then they had the minister come in and meet me my rights. So it was bad. So at this point, those things, those traumas, I think kicked off the hypoglycemia. The fructose made it worse. That made it worse. So that started getting worse, where I became non-ambulatory, and my daughter or son had to give me something to eat when the episodes happened. And then I started having like night sweats, tremendous night sweats, and numbness of limbs. And so it got crazy, but I still didn't do anything about it. I was not a going to the physician type of person. And I was physically very fit. So it wasn't until 2009 my sister had problems with gluten that she went to a chiropractor, and she said, she referenced the chiropractor to me, and the chiropractor was so she's a nutrition too. So
Mhm.
she was the first person who I told about the symptoms, and I thought it was diabetes. And so she said, no, you don't have high blood pressure, but she checked. She said, actually, you have low blood pressure. I mean, glucose.
Mhm.
And so that I don't know if she suggested or I just looked up what causes low blood sugar.
Mhm.
And the only thing, because I wasn't on insulin, I was fit, I wasn't overweight. Only thing was fructose intolerance. And so I looked up fructose intolerance and started eliminating. And so I did an elimination diet with her anyway. And I eliminated salt, eliminated fructose, and those began to work, but then they would stop working. And then
Right.
I would eliminate more things, grains, and I get down to fruits and seeds and stuff and realized I couldn't eat anything. I got to a point where and I wasn't a beef eater. So eggs, I loved eggs. Eggs, whatever sugar they have in them, eggs and dairy. Again, that's what I struggled with. I loved
Mm-hmm.
eggs, so I would go back and forth with eggs, but I can't eat eggs. I can't drink milk. So lactose. So it's like any carb, anything that needs to be broken down, I have a
Mm-hmm.
problem with. And so it wasn't until 2009 when I started managing the diet, and
Mm-hmm.
it ended up being carnivore. And I started looking up, is this healthy? Can I
Mm-hmm.
survive on a just meat? But at that point, I think in 2016, it wasn't a question that I can't eat plant food. So whether this is good or healthy or not, I didn't know. But all my doctors were telling me this is unhealthy, this is not healthy. And it really wasn't for me because it was only Atlantic salmon, because everything else I looked up had some kind of carbs in it
Right.
or bothered me. And so I just eventually, the concentration in 2016 is when I found out not only could I not eat any plant food, that apparently airborne aromas, fumes were bothering me.
Mm.
So that's when I started wearing a mask. I was wearing a mask when nobody else was wearing a mask. And it was like, okay, you know,
That's your practice.
and then, when the COVID thing started, people said, "Are you wearing this because COVID?" They had just started. People, and I was like, "No," and so it, I was trying to be a vegetarian.
Mm.
Eventually, I love veggies. I love sides. I love seafood and other things that have carbs in it, but and so it was not until I kept searching, and eventually I found Edie Fox.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, from like I think 2017, 2020, I began to learn how to eat healthier on
Mm-hmm.
a carnivore diet.
Yeah.
And I eventually learned about beef, and that can saved me. Eating,
Yes.
eating beef and eating salt and water um, helped me survive, even in the environment of my mother's house, which was a high concentration of carb fumes.
Mm-hmm. Um, so many nuggets in what you've just talked about. Um, the first thing I want to comment on is, in my nutrition and functional medicine training,
Mhm.
it's always a framing where we put you on a diet we think that'll help you. And that would be an elimination diet. That would be
Mhm.
maybe even a carnivore. If carnivore is the most, it's probably the best elimination diet because you
Yes.
eliminate all of that stuff, right? But then they always want to add things back with the hope that you'll identify the things that
Right.
harm you. And maybe that's okay for the population because most people don't have the extreme reaction that you have, right? And so maybe that's okay. So I'm not demonizing that approach, but it's not logical in some ways because you're saying, here are the things that you've removed that harm you, add some of them back. It doesn't even make sense, but
Right.
I get it. I get the premise is you may be able to tolerate some things and you won't. So one of the diets that they talk about a lot is the FODMAPs diet. And
Hmm.
when you think about that, the F being fermentable foods, the O being oligosaccharides. But man, you hear that saccharide, that doesn't sound good. And then you got those, like
Yeah, that
fruit.
they told me about that.
Woo! Then you got the disaccharides, that's the D, and
Right.
those are like the lactose type things. And then you got the monosaccharides, and that's fructose. But if you think about that, and then you got the polyols, mannitol, sorbitol.
Yes.
But the point of it is there's a lot of stuff in the FODMAPs diet, which is highly recommended for people with fructose
Yes.
intolerance. I don't understand that personally, but that's just me.
Right.
So that's the beauty of being a low carb doc who is learning nutrition and functional medicine that leans vegetarian, is that I can think slightly differently about what's being taught to me and question, like, this doesn't make sense.
Right.
So having said that, it may make sense for to start, but it doesn't make sense to add these things back to me. I also want to do a shout out to not only my university, University of Western States, but all the functional medicine
Yes.
and chiropractic
Yes.
clinicians on the planet, because it
Yes.
is you and your unique perspective that led to Terri A finding a
Yes.
different path. So
Yes.
I want to say that out loud,
Yep.
and I appreciate them. I'm still learning, but I think that is incredible. And we who have been trained in conventional medicine should be able to learn from that. We should be able to say maybe there's another way. So I'm just happy that you did me search, not research. You did me search. You were able to say, I'm gonna look up some stuff for myself, and clearly, just the way you articulated some of your points, you've been doing that, and I just want to applaud you. And I think anybody listening who has an issue should do some me search and
Yes.
make sure that you take ownership of your own journey. So anyway, having I love the fact that you're doing that, and I really hope that things change. So when it comes to conventional medicine versus functional medicine, uh, what, just based on your experience, what types of changes would you like to see in health systems, so that you can you can rely on them more often in the future? You couldn't to the extent you would have liked
Right.
with your problem, but what would you like to see change in our health system?
I recently came across a video on YouTube about Cuba's medical system, and they were receiving, in particular at this time, Black women, or you know, and I know that when they showed their doctors in action in the past, I noticed it was mostly, you know, Caucasian Cubans,
Right, that's fair.
men. And the fact that they are focusing on women, Black women, and the women that spoke, they were second residence students. They talked about the humanity, the focus of preventive medicine, the
Mhm,
humanity. They focused on that they don't have to mandate uh, vaccines because the people trust the doctors.
mm,
And so just that approach, I think getting out of our system is so capitalistic and is so entrenched, there will have to be an overhaul down from the educational system, from the medical educational system, just the approach. And so
mhm,
frankly, I don't think that's going to happen unless a divine intervention. But
mhm,
that's what I would see, because I was, unless I've talked to a lot of people who go to doctors, and some people had great experiences, but I think I was set to have these experiences, and they were traumatic,
mhm,
um, with the conventional medical system, which brought me here overall. But all of my interactions with the conventional medical system were traumatic.
mm,
When I did have the fall, it was not until 3 months. I don't know if there's a sign saying something. It was not until 3 months that I was accurately diagnosed. I went to the doctor and I was not diagnosed accurately until 3 months, and I was bleeding in my lungs, and they were filled up. So from there, and through this whole 10 to 12 years, my experiences were very traumatic. So I think that um, the information is out there,
mhm,
it's scattered, but it's not the dominant information. The dominant information is the conventional, political, capitalistic information. And so we need some divine intervention.
Yeah, we are. One of the reasons why I wanted you to come to this podcast was to, first of all, let people know that things like this are real.
Yes.
They're real. This is a real diagnosis. Hopefully inspire somebody who is, oh my God, nobody's ever said that my low sugar could be this, right?
Right.
But it's also to add some color to the conversation. And, I've been very fortunate to be on the Diet Doctor's website. And I don't know if there's, a lot of other diverse faces that look like me, but it doesn't matter. We're just adding diversity.
Yes.
And when I spoke at Low Carb USA, they had not had a lot of diverse faces at Low Carb USA. Myself and A-Day, the Black Carnivore, we're both going to be speaking at KetoCon in Texas in July-ish. So we start there. We add a diverse perspective. We fight and ask, why are there only 500 or 600 African American men being educated at medical schools every year? There's something wrong with that, and we're gonna fight. Now, why do we need a Black doctors? Why do we need a Black carnivore? People may ask, right?
Right.
There are levels of comfort with your clinician or the person that's advising you. And I wish we can fix it where everything's fine. The reality is the history of systemic racism. The term, I think, is iatrophobia. Iatrophobia means fear of the healer. Now, why do we have fear of the healer? We have fear of the healer because James Marion Sims back in the day was, doing C-sections on women of color without anesthesia.
Right.
We have, Margaret Sanger back in the day with Planned Parenthood targeting women of color. And we don't have to talk about syphilis experiments. So if somebody, even if a person of color never heard any of these stories, it is the perception that has been given to them from their parents and their grandparents that you can't trust the health system. So all we can do is continue to show up, be present, not be afraid to tell our stories. And good people with good conscience, they will hear us, they will see us, and they will bring us into their families, and we will bring them into ours. So I think that's how the world should be.
Yep.
And I'm really looking forward to that. So it's going to take a minute, and you're right. It's rolling the dice a little bit, but I do think that. So anyway, so thank you for those thoughts, because you got me fired up a little bit, and I really appreciate that. Now, there are many people listening who consume, fructose, and they're not having the same types of problems. For me, the starch and sugar causes irritable bowel. For you, it's a more serious issue. But we all know that carnivore is something we should consider. I did a video with A-Day Fox on her channel looking at the recent study that showed that, for the most part, even though it wasn't it was an epidemiological study. That's most of them, but it was a observational study. It wasn't a randomized controlled trial. So it does show association, correlation with a lot of good things when you do carnivore. So what advice would you give somebody listening to this episode about whether or not they should consider carnivore, even if they don't have the fructose intolerance you have?
I would say you had a person on who talked about the immune system, and he kind of broke it down. And I remember reading a medical article years ago who said we have a formidable immune system, but it's been compromised. And he suggested there was one thing that compromised it to cause all the especially the rare um, chronic diseases. And I think that when we introduce crystallized sugar from sugarcane and then from beets, that caused epi- um, epidemic changes genetically in our systems. And that has gone on with processed flour, no other processed foods, processed oils. But I think that causes people to have problems with plant food when we didn't otherwise have problems with plant food prior to the introduction of processed sugar. And I think that the reason I would tell people, even though your situation may not be as severe as mine, but the obesity, the diabetes, the autoimmune diseases, I think those are all Alzheimer are all contributable to too much carbs, the processed carbs, not enough exercise. All of those things in the industrial world have changed our bodies to the worse. And so that's what I would tell people, that to heal from the carb overload and the carb toxicity, the elimination diet, the carnivore diet we found out is a great way. Although they told us that red meat was bad, it turns out it is a healing process that can help the current modern health crisis.
Yeah. The fear of saturated fat is something that we're going to be working a long time to overcome. Thankfully, the Journal of the College of Cardiology has stated clearly that saturated fat is not only not to be feared, but should be embraced. And so we do have people kind of moving us towards that. In fact, when I did a podcast with I actually did one for myself. I just did an episode by myself recently, the one before the last one I just did. And I did talk about hypertension and diabetes and how they're all the same disease, insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is because of too much dietary carbs. And so the logical answer is not to take a pill, but to reduce the dietary carbs. It should be logical, but unfortunately, we throw pills at it. So I really appreciate that. And that makes me think about whether or not this is political or economic. And my question to you is like, and you've kind of answered this, but do you think that we struggle to be, to move to healing with nutrition because of politics and economics? Is that what you feel in your core?
Yes, I do. But I think there may be a different reason in terms of Black people, melanated people, particularly in the U.S. I think overall the government does push, although Weston Price showed back in the 30s that indigenous diets were healthier. So that information has been out, and I think the governments knew that. But their underlying goal has been, by action, to eliminate indigenous people, whether it's the first people, the natives, what they call the Native Americans, Black people, or any people of color. And so taking their foods, traditional foods away, making food deserts, has been an obvious uh, action that they've been doing. I think with Black people, it's what you said in terms of the suspicion of the system, but also, unfortunately, Dr. Sebi and Dr. Lila Africa, were very instrumental in getting people off processed food, but they did not. But they were still themselves affected by the no fatty red meats. And unbeknownst to them, which they both have passed, a lot of people clung to them.
Mm-hmm.
I got in contact with Dr. Lala Africa before he died, but based on his information of melanin and the difference between melanin. But then he was also kind of a student of Dr. Sebi, and
Mm-hmm.
so that increased vegetarianism among Black people.
Mm-hmm. Big time.
But again, the, um, it was kind of overall kind of short sighted,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know if athletes can really live off of vegetarianism. Muscular, building muscle.
They can, but it's hard.
Right. It's like,
Yeah, it's not it's much easier when your complete protein in the form of particularly in form of beef is being utilized, and you can throw tofu at you all day, but it's not a great
right,
source of protein. Its digestibility
right.
is just not at the same level. So it is going to require a lot of plants in order to reach those levels. And but again, if a person is listening to this episode and they are plant based and they are successful and their genetic makeup makes it easy for them to process these things, then have at it.
Yes,
I just find
definitely.
that for the patients I take care of, besides the fact that they just like to eat animals, they have thrived. And I had not several, but I had 3 patients today who were able to say, I'm doing this, doc. And one just lost 10 pounds, but his blood pressure was averaging, I don't know, 160, 150, and it was 120. He just lost 10 pounds.
Mm,
But it's amazing. The body is like, thank you for letting me breathe.
yeah.
When I took some courses with the Nutrition Network, which teaches low carb, led by the infamous Tim Noakes, right? One of his classes, when it went historical, that's why I'm gonna start calling you professor, because you're bringing some historical perspective. And he talked about, what's the appropriate diet for hunters and gatherers, but he particularly talked about some of the things that you touched on. And I think it's important that we understand our history,
Yep.
because it helps us to have perspective. And so I appreciate what you're sharing today. I appreciate what I learned with Professor Tim Noakes. So any clinician who is listening is like, I'd like to be a metabolically knowledgeable doc. The Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, Low Carb USA, they have relationships with the Nutrition Network to provide courses, very affordable CME courses. And I think that's a good place to start so that we can know our history,
Yeah.
and we can, maybe understand the, therapeutic carb restriction. How do we do that in a way that's safe so that people don't end up with a flare up of their gout or kidney stones when they're doing this? So, so just the simple question, and this is, again, we're touching on this as we speak, in order to move our society to being more tolerant, not just of people of color, but of different dietary approaches, any thoughts on, what we would have to do to make that happen?
Well, I think the process of cultivating food has to be addressed. Small farms, regenerative farms,
Mm-hmm.
people who can tolerate plants, with our modern physiology. I think plants are great, and I think meat is great.
Mm-hmm.
I think beef is great.
Right.
But, in terms of our whole approach to food and to everything is focused on capitalism. The
Mm.
main focus isn't quality.
Mm.
And if they know the information, they use the information not to help the people, but to manipulate us.
Mm.
I think they have the information, but they use the information to manipulate us. So in our society, I think the smaller farms would be nice, break down the large agricultural farms, agricultural systems. Until they do that, we have no really input, into the Monsanto people, the chemical people, how they, particularly with the plants, the animals can sustain that a little bit better and we can eat the animals safely without inflammation. But the plants, I think the chemically sprayed plants and the dead soil, the things that they put into the food because the soil is dead, basically almost. Um, it's hard, but I think if we start raising up small farms and small agriculture, um, that would be a good beginning.
Yeah, I like that. I think I had Diana Rogers' Sustainable Dish podcast on as a previous guest, and she, did a great documentary that focuses on regenerative farming. And again, if we allow our animals to graze and to live and also
Yes.
to live a decent life, for
Yes.
Christ's sake, and the studies do show that that approach can work even on a large scale. But again, we have to stop doing all of this mass produced stuff. And then now we'll have a way of farming that'll not only not put the bad stuff in the air, to actually put it back in the
Yes.
ground,
Yes.
right?
The
So I
nitrogen.
think
Yes.
you're right. And I think that I'm optimistic that that's a possibility in the
Yes.
future. So thank you for that. One of the things that was funny, clearly you do research, and I really appreciate that. We have to, kind of do our own research, me search. And I want to ask you, you mentioned that you are very good analytically, but you struggle with common sense, the common sense gene. So talk a little bit, what did you mean when you shared that?
Well, basically, over the years, I guess I've, pondered that I was kind of considered weird. And, though I think my weirdness caused me not to notice it right away, it would come after. So, kind of socially, I'm not clued in. So I have to practice. Once I learned I had a problem, I
Mm-hmm.
have to practice social interaction. And I seemingly don't have image memory. I don't make pictures. And I found out that people do. I mean, I'm like the opposite of what's her name? The animal plant, and she made the animal plants humane. Temple Grandin.
Yes.
I'm like the opposite of her. So what
Okay.
I see in my mind, which I thought was normal, kind of are like X-rays, and so I don't see images. So my memory is kind of based on concepts, and so studying it enhances that. I like to study. I like to do research, but I
Wow.
don't remember pictures. I don't have short-term memory. I don't have
Mm,
a lot of short-term memory. So in terms of social interactions growing up, I just missed a lot of stuff.
mm.
And my brain can't take it. And if there's a lot of stimulation, I lose that a lot of stuff. I don't get it. I have a very narrow vision of what's going on.
It's and again, going back to my functional medicine thinking cap, what's the root cause of that, right? And I wonder if we had discovered that even the scent of fructose can be an issue for you early in your life. If we had discovered that a animal-based diet was best for you early in your life, would those neurons and connections, would they have developed differently in such a way that you wouldn't have had this? Who knows? But it's speculation. But my hope is that as you continue your journey, that you get better at this. I want you to keep reading and studying, but it'd be nice if you acquire some of the things that maybe the next person is able to do
Yes.
without thinking about it. Briefly share your typical day in terms of what you eat. I think everybody's always curious about carnivore. What's a typical day for you?
Well, I learned from her name is Dr. Remke. She was on Edie Fox show. She's a chiropractor, and I had lost a lot of weight, and by October I was like 88 pounds, and I wasn't eating enough because I was too weak, and so I learned from Dr. Remke that if you eat enough beef, or ruminant animal meat, and fat, you can gain weight. Because I know most people were getting on a carnivore diet to lose weight, and I wasn't. So she said there's a certain amount, like kind of a formula, if you eat enough protein. So I increased my protein intake. I eat 3 times a day, typically 3 times a day, and I try to eat 7 to 8 ounces at a meal of beef and ground beef and brisket. And I add some chicken thighs with that. So I eat that 3 times a day typically. And that's pretty much what I eat. Salt, I salt my food lightly because of I'm constantly still contaminated. And although I'm at a place there's less concentration of fumes, there's still a level that weakens me, and so I'm very sensitive to salt. So that's what I found out. So I have to keep my salt, in check, so
Yeah, keep
that
it in check.
that. So between that and unfortunately diarrhea, I have to balance water, salt intake, and gaining weight.
Okay.
So
And you don't get a lot of people are like, that's boring. So how are you gonna how do you get over the boredom of eating
you know,
I mean, I know there's a lot carnivores eat a lot of amazing things. You see it on the post, right? But you keep yours very simple. So do you get bored?
no, I am glad to be alive.
Yeah.
And I've never been big on eating. I
Okay.
ate because I needed to.
That's fair.
It's never been like a festival. I don't know, whatever people think of eating. I
Yeah.
remember thinking, I think, well, what would happen if I couldn't eat at that time, whatever I wanted. But eating was never really a big excitement for me. So the fact that if I'm healthy and I'm alive, that's my priority.
I received that. So thank you for that. And okay, so um it's clear that we met thankfully through the Black Carnivores platform,
Yes.
and you came to me partly because I don't look cross-eyed at you when you say you're a carnivore, right? So that's a
Right.
win. What are you expecting to gain from our relationship as we start a patient-physician relationship?
I think the first thing was that you some empathy, support and empathy, um, and a look at my situation with objectivity, openness, and to get diagnosed, and to go forward from being diagnosed, because I think where I live matters, and having that diagnosis and that understanding can maybe help me get services, particularly where I live. So even walking out in the outside, if there are restaurants or just the summer heat, I can't tolerate heat anymore. I used to could tolerate it well, and just dealing with those things with a professional medical diagnosis, I think would really help.
Yeah, well, I promise to do my best. We're gonna take this journey together, and we're gonna learn together, and we're gonna do research together. So we're gonna make that. It'll be some me search and you search. We're gonna get it done. So I thank you for that. And I guess as we get close to wrapping up, I want to ask you if they were to do your eulogy. a long time from now, what would you want that person to say about you?
Oh my goodness. I would want people to say that I helped bring truth to light. I guess if in a nutshell.
That's it. Well, amen to that. Yes. Oh, I feel like we're doing this every time I do this podcast. I feel like that's happening. So I like that a lot. And speaking of the podcast, the nest and rope, obviously we're going to focus on a lot of things, but is there certain areas you're going to give extra attention?
Um, uh, I want to say, I think relationships have always been a weakness, but that's something I want to get down in terms of respecting people, loving people, irregardless, regardless of their um, position to me, whether for or anti or agreement or not. I want to respect people more.
Yeah, I like that. And relationships are critical. And obviously, you need to practice your interaction.
Yes.
So I think the more you have relationships, the better. And I have enjoyed our conversation. I've enjoyed our first visit together, and I know we'll have many more. And because your story is unique, we may even hopefully write something up to share. So, and I'll probably even be reaching out to our good friend A-Day Fox and see if we can get her involved, since we're all kind of on the same team. So Terri A, thank you for being here, and I just appreciate you being on the Protecting Your Nest podcast.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you as well.
Thank you. So, guys, today's guest, really shared a unique story, that was really just as surprising for me as it may have been for you. Today we have additional evidence that each and every one of us is unique and must learn which dietary pattern is best for our particular needs. That's so important. I, I really believe in this me search concept. And if Terri's motivation was not strong enough to do me search, she probably would have never found the healing that she's found so far. So I really want everybody listening to do some me search and make sure that you prioritize yourself, because I don't think anybody cares more about you than you. And if you're spiritual, maybe it's the man or woman above, but I think it's you. So I really am happy that she was able to find carnivore and the carnivore community led by, at least one of the communities led by the Black carnivore A-Day Fox. So, a place where people can learn and receive support. So everybody listening, I appreciate each and every one of you for, being on this episode, checking it out. If you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you're on a podcast app, do the same, and maybe even write some comments if you enjoyed our conversation. I promise to continue to have engaging guests. Maybe it's a patient, maybe it's a Tim Noakes of the world, and I just need your ear so you can hear what they have to share. So until we meet again, continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest.